Experiments are one of the most important tools in science. In many situations, they're the most direct way that scientists can test their hypotheses and theories. But what exactly is an experiment? What are scientists doing when they design and carry out experiments? In this video, we'll go over the main parts of an experiment and some of the challenges that come up when trying to design one. When scientists discuss what they're attempting to do in an experiment, they talk a lot about variables. The terminology here can get a little confusing, so let's discuss it. An experiment, at its most basic level, is an attempt to determine whether there's a relationship between two variables in a phenomena you're interested in. For example, whether exercise decreases the risk of heart disease. Variables are anything that can vary or occur in different states. You can think of an experimental setup as a way to sort the variables in a phenomenon into three categories: independent, dependent, and controlled. The two variables you're interested in most are the independent and dependent variables. In an experiment, the independent variable is the thing you want to vary or be able to intervene on. It's called independent because your goal in setting up the experiment is for its value to not be dependent on anything else. It should be entirely under your control. The dependent variable is what you measure in an experiment. It's called dependent because its value may depend upon the value of the independent variable, along with other variables. If we're investigating whether exercise decreases the risk of heart disease, exercise and heart disease are the independent and dependent variables. How do you know which is which? Think about it this way. We want to check for an effect on heart disease. So, heart disease is the dependent variable. Exercise is the independent variable, the variable we want to intervene on or change. In order to be as sure as possible about the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable, a well-designed experiment has to eliminate all other potential factors that could influence the value of the dependent variable. For example, in an experiment investigating whether exercise protects against heart disease, many other factors, aside from whether someone is exercising, will impact their chances of heart disease. For example, their diet, whether they smoke, other health conditions like diabetes, or even their age. These factors are called extraneous variables. They're called extraneous because they're not directly related to the relationship you're interested in examining between the independent and dependent variables. Ensuring that extraneous variables don't impact the relationship you are studying must be achieved in different ways in different types of experiments. But in general, the elimination of these factors is called controlling for the extraneous variables. So, an experiment is an attempt to determine whether a change in the independent variable is correlated with a change in the dependent variable after controlling for extraneous variables. If no other variables can be responsible for that change in the dependent variable, we can infer that the change in the independent variable was responsible for it. In terms of our example, an increase in exercise leading to a decrease in heart disease incidence, while all other variables are controlled for, would enable us to conclude that exercise helps prevent heart disease. Briefly, there are two major approaches for controlling extraneous variables. One approach is to ensure the value of extraneous variables don't change. This is why, for example, experiments in chemistry are always run in a lab at a standard temperature. This is called direct variable control. A second approach for controlling extraneous variables is called indirect control. In this approach, scientists don't try to change the value of extraneous variables or even know what those values are. Instead, they try to make sure that variation in extraneous variables is not correlated with the intervention on the independent variable. So, in our example, we'd want to make sure that whether someone exercises is decided independently from their age, medical condition, diet, and so on. Indirect variable control is often done by randomly dividing experimental subjects into two groups and then artificially changing the value of the independent variable in one of those groups. For example, by assigning members of that group an exercise regime. If there are extraneous variables that cannot successfully be controlled for in an experimental setup, or weren't even considered, Those would be called confounding variables. They're called confounding because they complicate or confuse the relationship the experimenter is attempting to establish between the independent and dependent variable. Sometimes some confounding variables are known and unavoidable. These could be accounted for in the results of the experiment by lowering the confidence the experimenter reports having in the results. Some confounding variables are unknown and may not be uncovered until much later, if at all. This is why it's difficult to design an experiment that gives us perfect confidence in the relationship it shows between the independent and dependent variables. It's a real testament to the ingenuity and perseverance of scientists that they regularly produce experiments that can give us so much knowledge about the world.